I'd like to welcome you all to the Candidates Forum on Open Space. My name is Karen Gray, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Wildlands Trust. And the Wildlands Trust currently works in 38 towns throughout our region. But we have a special affinity for this town, the town of Plymouth. We were thrilled to be able to move our headquarters here 2 years ago. We've settled in nicely, and the community has embraced us, and we feel like we're off to a great start here in this town. Our work throughout the region gives us a really close-up view of many, many different towns. As I said, we work in 38 towns. We know lots of town employees. We know lots of committees. We know lots of town residents in an area that goes from as far north as Milton over to Swansea in the west and down to Bourne in the south. It's a 1,500 square mile area that we work in. And I can tell you in all honesty that Plymouth is a great town. And word is out that this is a great town because a lot of people want to live here now. Today our population in Plymouth is hovering at around 60,000. However, the town is forecasting 25% growth in the next 13 years, up to 75,000 people. And that's why we're here today, because among Plymouth's many assets is its natural resources. And as growth accelerates, the pressure on these resources will be unprecedented. We need to ensure the protection of our water and open lands in light of the projected growth. And that's what we are here to discuss with the 7 individuals sitting up here who are looking to serve you in town government. I'm going to hand the microphone over to our moderator, Doug Hart. Doug is the chairman of the board of Wildlands Trust, and he's perfect for this task at hand. He knows how to run a great meeting, and he's from Duxbury, so he doesn't have a horse in the race. And we really appreciate him taking his Saturday morning to come up and do this for us. So welcome everybody, and thank you, Doug.
First, a couple of ground rules, actually more than a couple of ground rules. Please turn off your phones if you have a phone. And standing behind the camera in the middle of the room is Sam Murphy. Sam is a student at Plymouth North, and he's volunteered his Saturday morning to be here doing this for PACTV. So Sam, thanks very much. The way it's going to work is the candidates will now each take 1 minute to introduce themselves. And that will be their opportunity to do 2 things. Well, 3 things. 1, introduce themselves. 1, gauge the volume for those in the back of the room. And practice stopping when your time is up. Then we'll go through 6 questions, which will be up on the screen here. And I will read them, and you'll have a minute and a half to answer the question. While you're answering those questions, on each of your seat, there's a piece of paper, and write down a question that you might like to hear answered, and someone will be coming around with this silver bowl and collect them, and then we'll be able to select 3 or 4 of those at the end of the meeting. Now, if your handwriting is like mine, your question won't get chosen. So try hard to write so I will be able to read it when it gets to me. I think that is all the ground rules. We're going to do the questions starting in alphabetical order, A through Z for the first group of questions, Z through A for the second set of questions. And so I guess Mr. Brenner is not here, so we will start with Ms. Cavacco. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Betty Cavacco. I want to thank Wildlands Trust for hosting this opportunity for all of you to hear what each of us stand for and what we will work for as selectmen. For more years that make any reasonable sense, most of the issues we will hear discussed this morning have been discussed and debated to death. Issues such as increasing taxes, reliance on residential development over commercial light industrial development, communication with town government, etc., etc. The problem is not lack of awareness or plans. The problem is lack of action. And I'm here to tell you that the time for talking is over. It is time to act. People know me as a doer, not a talker, but I am also a listener. I am persistent, focused, and committed to the residents of Plymouth. I am tenacious when needed, and as selectman, I plan on action. Now is the time. With all of us working together, we can find...
Okay, thank you. Mr. Corson.
Thank you. Zoning describes the preferred development outcome. Land use describes existing patterns of development. Zoning and land use are often similar, but they can be legitimately different too. Good morning, and thank you to the Board of Wildlands Trust for sponsoring this very open and critical airing of issues so germane to our incredibly beautiful community. For those who may have researched my background, you would have discovered that one of my college degrees was that of a Bachelor of Science of Forestry and Wildlife Management at the University of New Hampshire. Raised by parents who were true stewards of Mother Nature, dendrology, flora, and fauna ecosystems became a passion, and my father, who retired as New Hampshire's third Fish and Game Director, made sure I took no shortcuts to a comprehensive understanding of the critically sensitive balance between open space and development, and the different ways in which open space can present itself, and how development, if not monitored closely, could encroach and take away forever and ever. Are we up to this challenge? Yes, we are, thanks in huge part to you and people like the Wildlands Trust. Thank you.
Planning, analysis, and solution-based outcomes, the themes of my career, my public service, and my run for selectman. With a 400% growth in population growth over 60 years and taxpayer service demands, the Board of Selectmen need the temperament and appreciation of the land, beyond just the selling price. We must maximize our public open space investments through ecotourism, protect the environment, and maintain tax-generating land stocks. Incentivize private open space to maintain the right of reasonable economic gain and its tax-generating status while protecting the environment. Instill a culture of resource usage as opposed to consumption and elimination. Learn the development potential of the 1,500 acres as opposed to proclaiming development concepts without context. Repurpose the power plant site for a new clean energy production and investigate other townwide options. Identify future townwide wastewater disposal needs. Economic sustainability and protecting the environment. To this end, I, Marc Garrett, ask for your vote for Selectmen on Saturday, May 20th. Thank you, and thank you to Wildlands Trust for the forum.
Mr. Mcgregor.
Hello, I'm Malcolm Mcgregor, candidate for re-election to the Planning Board, all by myself here. Over the past 40 years, I've been a member and sometimes chairman of the Conservation Commission, the Board of Health, and the Planning Board. In 2009, the American Planning Association awarded me with their Citizens Planning Award for many years of service in Plymouth. The honor is awarded to citizens who have made, in their words, a distinguished contribution to planning. As a member of both the Conservation Commission and Planning Board, I helped place many of our environmental protections that we take for granted, from a town wetlands bylaw, the aquifer protection bylaw, to zoning changes that made Pine Hills possible. I believe that open space preservation is a major component of many of the goals in Plymouth's future vision, as documented in the 2006 master plan. Open space functions provide aquifer protection, species preservation.
Mr. Mahoney.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Mahoney. I'm coming to the end of my third term on the Plymouth Board of Selectmen. Prior to that, I was fortunate enough to be on the Finance and Advisory Board, and before that, I was a member of town meeting from Precinct 3. And I can tell you, for selfish reasons, both personally and for the community, I am so happy that the Wildlands Trust, we stole them from Duxbury and brought them to Plymouth, because this is I can't say enough about this facility, and I can guarantee you that if I'm fortunate enough to come back for a fourth term, I'm going to tell Mr. Tavares that I want a Board of Selectmen's meeting hosted in this event, in this forum. Having said that, you're running a business. The number one thing you do, and this is indisputable, is water. You have to invest in water proactively. We don't have enough for any sort of economic development, be that residential, industrial, commercial. And if you want more water and you want to ensure the quality of that water, you need to buy strategic parcels of land. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Paul McAlduff. I'm a candidate for the Board of Selectmen. I'm going to go a different way. As a child, I grew up in Roxbury, and I spent all my spare time in Franklin Park Zoo. We then moved to Jamaica Plain, and I got a bicycle and went up to Jamaica Pond and drove all over Jamaica Pond, the Arbor Way, all the way into the Charles River. When I moved to another part of JP, as we called it, got an automobile and discovered Arnold Arboretum, I thought I died and went to heaven. As a child, you don't know why you like open space and trees and fauna and all of these beautiful things that we have here in Plymouth. So eventually, I moved here to Plymouth, and I can't tell you how much I love it. I have conservation land that I couldn't vote on in my backyard because I was on the planning board. 180 acres of conservation in my backyard. Thank God for Plymouth and saving land, and I will do everything I can to help that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now we'll go to the questions. So we will start with question 1, starting with Ms. Cavacco. Please share your views on what makes the town of Plymouth special and explain how you will work to maintain the features that contribute to its unique character.
Thank you. What makes the town of Plymouth special is really all of you, and never mind the landscape that we enjoy. One of the things that I have noticed, and I have lived here since I was 6 years old, and I'm 56, so I've been here for 50 years. There's a lot of change, and I don't think residents really are that aware of all the building that's going on. You know, every time you turn around, there's more construction, more development, more everything. One of the best things that I remember as a child, was all of what I didn't know at that time was open space. And I think that is what we need to really concentrate on, because open space of our lands and our areas is what really makes this town beautiful. Thank you.
I've lived in Plymouth for 4 years, so I'm the new guy on the block. As a matter of fact, in this selectman's race, I'm on the part of the totem pole that's underground. But with my background in forestry and wildlife management and having seen the natural landscape, I think what makes Plymouth beautiful is not the people so much, but the landscape. We have inherited an incredibly beautiful landscape. We have ecologically and environmental sensitive areas, the pine barrens, the coast, the 30 or 40 coastal ponds. It's just an incredibly beautiful place. The idea here is to keep it that way, improve on it, acquire habitat. If any of you have had a chance to see my trifold, that's one of my platform planks, is to acquire habitat. Preserve what we have, redefine open space, redefine common sense, and find a way to establish fiscal stability in doing this. It can be done. We can axe the tax. Let's not put this on the back of property taxes. Let's put it on the backs of users, be it sewer, be it water consumption.
Give you 20 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mark, you can have my 20.
You don't want to finish your sentence?
I can't remember what it was.
I got to remember the question now. Oh, Plymouth provides a very unique situation. First of all, it's a patch of 104 square miles, give or take. And of that 104 square miles, it is part of the coastal zone, it is part of the inland zone. It is a patch that has endured quite a bit of anthropogenic activity, human-induced activity, in which it was forested, replanted, and it's been utilized for mercantile and maritime economics. There is a vast array of opportunity. However, we have to learn balance. Nature functions in balance. Nature functions with an energy flow that remains in balance. And for all the catastrophic things we see, whether it's climatic, seismic, or whatever, this is nature coming back to balance. We're pushing nature hard. Nature is bigger than us. We have to respect it, and we have to know that in the end of the day, nature will return to balance. And our stewardship of our patch is tantamount to that.
To me, the wonders of Plymouth are its natural beauty. and at this point, how we've interfaced the residential and the wonderful beauty in the forests and wetlands and cranberry bogs. And we have to maintain that natural beauty. That natural beauty provides us with many services. It provides us with species protection, aquifer protection, which is perhaps the most important issue in this town and in this state, because water is a resource that's going rapidly. Noise buffering, climate moderation, wildlife and trail connections and protection, all are important in maintaining the balance that Mark spoke of, along with which we have to introduce and expand our economic development in ways that don't create a loss to this environment. Thank you.
So 104 square miles, half an hour from Boston, half an hour from Cape Cod. What a perfect location. 25 to 35 miles of ocean frontage, 350 ponds. You've heard that. In theory, a pond for every day of the year. Wonderful downtown area, waterfront shops, etc. I mean, the assets that this community possesses are literally off the charts. But we've got to learn before it's too late that we still want to conserve and have available to us these quality forests and obviously waterfront access, whether it be freshwater or saltwater. So the question is, how am I going to work to do that? I've got a 9-year history of doing that. 2009 and 2010, I sat with 4 other members of the Board of Selectmen. In both years, they sponsored articles to go to town meeting. All 4 votes were 4-1. One article each year was to eliminate the Community Preservation Act, and then another article was reduce it from 1.5 contribution down to 1/4%. Okay? Short-sighted political hacks, all they wanted to do is look good in front of the cameras, and I don't care if you tell them this because we're all friends, okay, to pursue a policy of higher residential property taxes, larger government, and more debt. And you recently had a petitioned article by a town meeting member that went forward that also I supported not supporting that at town meeting. Michael Withing got up on town floor and said exactly what I just said. If you get rid of the Community Preservation Act, you want higher property taxes and larger government. I will never do that.
Thank you. Good morning, all. My name is Paul McAlduff. I've lived in Plymouth for 38 years. Before I came to Plymouth, I found its natural beauty. I went camping in the state forest, and it was just a wonderful experience. Went swimming at White Horse Beach, found Long Beach, loved that. I'm an ocean person. I grew up on the ocean even though I was in the city of Boston. We are very fortunate to have all of these things within a walkable area to most of us. Plymouth's natural beauties are what I find the best thing that Plymouth has to offer. One of the plans that the planning board put together is a VOSD, which preserves open space while allowing a developer to build homes. This is a great tool that we have, and it's being used more and more by developers, so we're able to save more and more open space. Thank you.
Over the past 15 years, the town has leveraged $29 million in state matching funds and grants with its original $17 million investment in the Community Preservation Act. Please describe your position on the Community Preservation Act and reference a CPA open space project that illustrates this position.
Thank you. That's a great question. I am a member of the CPA, so it gives me a good advantage. And I will say one of the best acquisitions we ever got was this piece of property here. It wasn't specifically for the Wildlands Trust. It was to be preserved as open space. And fortunately, the Wildlands Trust took it over and have done a wonderful job with this property. I think the CPA is great. I still have my very first tax bill with I think it was like $7.90 I spent. Every year I look at that little bit of money, maybe it's $12. That's $12 well spent. We need to keep the CPA running and keep it doing all of its work. I have supported every land acquisition property that's come before the CPA while I have been on the board. Thank you very much.
So just reinforcing what I said with that last question, obviously I will never, and I have a history, 9-year history of doing so, I will never compromise the Community Preservation Act because it compromises the community. You basically, this is a mutual fund that you put money into that is in the black, almost $50 to $75 million into the economic development and investment that is brought to the community, not only with open space, but with people coming in downtown area to go to the Spire Theater. You're running a business. One of the greatest acquisitions the CPA has made was 380 acres in Cedarville, Massachusetts, around 2 municipal wells. You went to town meeting with $3 million. You paid cash on the barrelhead. You didn't have to borrow. You didn't have to raise taxes. You didn't have to pay interest. The money was there. The reason the money is there is because it's not in the general fund. You go to a closing, your finance director shows up with a bag of money. That's the town contribution, because the town didn't pay $3 million. The town manager then shows up with the other amount of money. The other 350 communities in the state of Massachusetts are ponying up their share. That's conservatism. You've mitigated risk with respect to the 2 wells. You've ensured their lifetime, almost in perpetuity, the sustainability and quality of those wells. And if you want to jump through a couple of hoops at the state level, you have the ability to create a 3rd well there, only enhancing your ability to develop more economic development.
The Community Preservation Act is imperative. I think we should even increase the percentage allowed. It's imperative for all the functions that I mentioned with regards to open space, the most important of which is aquifer protection, as amplified by John. About 30 years ago, I was on a committee called the Water Supply Citizens Advisory Committee, which was promoted by Edward King, the governor, and it was to evaluate the MDC's desire to come to Plymouth and take their groundwater to supply Boston. That committee, which met at the University of Massachusetts once a month, made short work of the MDC, put them right out of business just because of rational thought. So that water is important, and the CPC can protect it or help protect it, and that's a necessity. Thank you.
In my mind, the CPA is a solution-based outcome, which is what I said in my first sentence of my opening statement. I fully support the CPA, and to identify a project, I think most of the projects that have been done have been very good. I think if I had 2 critiques of the CPA, and I don't mean to be negative about it, but to improve it, I think we need to look at possibly a little bit more diversification in the types of lands we buy. Lands in South Plymouth are different than lands in North Plymouth. A green patch in an urbanized or a suburbanized area could be important to that community. The second, so I think we have to diversify a little bit more. The second observation I want to make is we knee-jerk to put conservation restrictions on land. We should only use the conservation restriction for purely conservation purposes. But if there are other outcomes, and water is one that has been referenced a couple of times here, when we craft the conservation restriction, we should think about the uses we want to extract from that piece of land before limiting us. However, I'm in full support of the CPA going forward. Thank you.
I'm also in favor. You've got to be stupid not to be in favor of the CPA. I'd be in favor of it increasing it to 3% from 1.5, which we can do. If I had in a perfect world, if I had my druthers, I would have 3 Congress people at Beacon Hill, DiMacedo, Maritano, and Meritori and Collins, advocate for changing the ratio of how CPA monies are spent. I am totally in favor of open space acquisition. I do, Mark, consider water a conservation, but that notwithstanding, we have to take care of the aquifer. The Plymouth Carver Aquifer has an estimated capacity of 500 billion gallons of water. We have to protect the land around it. It can never become contaminated. It has to be regulated in terms of use. I think CPA monies can be allocated more for conservation issues than for historical sites, such as the Sims House. Thank you.
CPA should be at the top of our priorities. We need to responsibly purchase as much open space to ensure our aquifer continues to stay as one of the best in the state. Ecotourism is a giant industry, and that we must welcome and prioritize. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Cavacco, you'll get the next question.
Okay.
The largest remaining parcel of open land in the town is the 1,500-acre tract owned by Entergy. Please share your vision for the Entergy land.
Okay, I won't mention the rainbows and unicorns, but I'll try and make this as brief as possible. The 1,500 acres in Entergy, I can understand and probably would approve some type of light industrial exactly where the Entergy plant is right now. Other than that, I believe that the 1,500 acres should be open space, period. I don't think there should be anything else on that property. Maybe some ecotourism. There are beautiful trails up there. It's the Pine Hills. It's one of the highest points in the state. And I don't think we should flurry it with any type of buildings, any type of homes, anything. Keep it as open space. Let's prioritize our ecotourism and bring folks in to see the beauty of what this town really holds. Thank you.
This is where we begin to disagree. Some of you may or may not know, I think John Mahoney probably does, that RKG and Larry Hartman and certain department heads this week began the process of the best utilization for that land. They have hired a land developing company in concert with a conservation land company to see what the mitigation costs would be long and short-term range to spread the tax base in our town, but to maintain open space at the same time. That, I think, and I would be receptive to, in the event there are elected, to be receptive to any ideas that made sense long-term. The long-term utilization of that land has to have an economic benefit. There is open space, folks, and then there's open space. Yes, there are trails there. It is part of the Pine Hills, but it's also ideal for an expansion of a certain kind of residential development, specifically empty nester, where you don't contribute to the infrastructure of schools and education, but you bring in solid money. The Pine Hills last year brought in $17.8 million. That's not chicken feed. Thanks.
Again, I'm going to reference back to my opening statement because it's proactive thought. We need to learn the development potential, and I would add the limitations of the 1,500 acres, as opposed to proclaiming development concepts without context. Nobody really knows what that land can do. Every piece of land has benefits, every piece of land has limitations. And before we start saying residential use, open space, economic development, we need to know the land, we need to feel the land, we need to understand the land. I salute Lee. Lee and I have talked about this. Okay, I salute Lee moving forward with a revised RKG report. That's what we have to do. We have to know what we're dealing with before we just start promising things that may or may not be able to happen. Okay, it's a valuable piece of land. I get it. But we have to know the land before we start doing anything. I will tell you, as a co-author of the Industrial Commercial Land Study, as an economic site, it's a niche site, it's not close to access, it would require not only local investment, but massive state investment. Okay, comments have been made about moving Route 3A. We don't have that authority. That's a state road, so you have to look at what the opportunities really are before you start promising things.
A piece of land as large as that shouldn't be given short shrift. To develop a piece of land without knowing what will happen is absurd, because once you develop it, it doesn't go back. So I believe the town should purchase that because it's an asset that won't lose value, and then plan it. And plan it to the best advantage for our future and our future generations. It is a unique piece of land. It is the highest point on the east coast south of Cadillac Mountain in Maine and Georgia, rising up out of the ocean, so it has a unique geological character. It has wonderful hiking. The hiking is as good as the Blue Hills, not as long, but as steep, and it is beautiful forest. It's been burned over a number of times, so that forest is new and changed and quite spectacular. And it may be valuable for some residential, some light industry, some open space, but that has to be determined by a plan and well thought out and projected into the future. Thank you.
If you ever get an opportunity and you need the fire chief's permission to do this, there's a fire tower adjacent to this property. If you can ever get up in that tower, the views of Cape Cod Bay are absolutely stunning. To Malcolm's point, this is the highest elevation on the eastern seaboard, apparently between Camden, Maine and South Carolina. This is the last chance in eastern Massachusetts to do something special instead of making a spur-of-the-moment, instantaneous and competent decision, which this community has specialized at in the last 45 years. So it is imperative that if we get a bite at the apple, the Board of Selectmen bring this article to town meeting, and in a perfect world, we get control of it. You just suffered a loss in your economic development department. You lost Jessica Casey, probably as good as it gets. Went up to the MBTA in Boston. The Board of Selectmen had had numerous conversations, generic with respect to this parcel. It was unanimous that we do whatever we can to engage entity and get the access to this parcel. And then you put together a long-range plan with a combination of potentially open space, light industrial, or a potential residential component. But town staff and the Board of Selectmen understands that if there's a potential economic, development, aspect of this, that's got to be brought forth. So we've got all our ducks in a row. We've already lined up. There's been conversation at the state level, and we've got multiple revenue streams lined up to access this if we get opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you a story. A few years ago, I got permission from John Judge. I'm a professional photographer, to go up and photograph some sunsets up on the top of the Pine Hills. So my wife and I drove up. We got the keys to the gate and drove up. And while we were there, 6 dirt bikes came out of the woods. They scared me. I had my wife get in her car and lock the doors. That's how afraid I was. And I'm a guy. I can handle myself, but not against 6 of them. We need to gain control of this property. And let me clarify, they were very nice men. They were just lost. And then they just took off and went on their way. But nevertheless, it was scary. We need to get control of this land so that the great trails that we have will not be destroyed by dirt bikes. They do not respect the environment. They just go wherever they want. Having said that, I agree we need a comprehensive look at this property. It may very well be able to be divided into some commercial, some residential, and a lot of open space. We need to do this thoughtfully, though. And I agree with most of my previous members that say we need to look at this with the magnifying glass and make sure we get it right the first time and get rid of the dirt bikes. Thank you.
Plymouth sits on the second largest sole aquifer in the state. What do you perceive to be the biggest threat to the resource, and what would you do to ensure its protection?
That's a tough one. There is so much residential development going on, and everybody has a straw in the ground sucking water out of it. I don't know how we can prevent that. People have the right to build homes if they own land, and they are doing that. They all need water. A lot of the larger residential developments are putting in their own private wells to service their communities. The Pine Hills has, 80 Makepeace has, White Cliffs have. So these are all problems we have. We don't have enough water supply. There was recently a development that wanted to go into the industrial park up in North Plymouth, and they were told by the town that there wasn't enough water to supply them. We need to put in more wells. I don't know how we can conserve. We've had a great year this year with rain, and that's what we need, but we can't guarantee it. We were in a 2-year drought. The last 2 years we were in a drought. This year, the amount of rain we've had has brought us up above that drought level that we had for 2 years ago. So I say, let's get some more rain. Thank you.
So this just reinforces some of the prior comments, questions, and you're going to continue to strategically purchase land where it makes sense, especially around your wells and where potential future wells exist. 2009, I was on the board, and we had an engineering firm from Sandwich come in, Horsley Witten. They did an analysis of the 104 square miles, and because the board wanted to be proactive and see where the potential future sites were for water. And they came up with 6 of them. The greatest one out of the 6 is over in Manomet in Shallow Pond Estates. It's on a piece of land that the town calls the Briggs property. The quality and quantity of the potential of this well was off the charts, and not only was it the best potential well in Plymouth, but they said it was the best potential well in a multiple 100 square mile area. We own the land. We can't get the water because there's an individual in an adjacent parcel of 58 acres that wants to put in a 40B. So something that maybe we could do is get through to our state delegation and maybe some of these other individuals, especially in the city, and change these laws. So this 40B law, in theory, is supposed to provide affordable housing. It doesn't. It makes all of our housing more unaffordable. In the environmental impact letter from that development, 3rd page, we're going to put 400 kids into your school system. That's $50 million for an elementary school and $10 million expenditure of finding a well somewhere else in the community because we can't access that one. It doesn't make any sense.
The insults to our aquifer are mainly from septic systems and sewage discharge. Some time ago, we implemented 3-acre zoning to deal with this issue in the planning board. And the 3-acre zoning was determined that, which was a stretch in terms of state law, determined that the discharge to the aquifer from septic systems over that size parcel would be minimum at best. So the planning board, with 3-acre zoning now basically required in most of Plymouth, subdivides properties and clusters the homes, and where possible, puts in sewage treatment facilities which deal with the discharge in a little bit better fashion. So we just have to maintain that, and as far as the state's concerned, the 3-acre zoning should protect our aquifer as best as can be protected, unless we sewer most everything. Thank you.
Water is a life requisite requirement. We are 98% water and $1.25 worth of chemicals. Okay? That's the significance of water, and that's the significance of water supply. We, as animals, humans and others, are consumptive by nature. And consumptive means that you don't allow for regeneration. We have to change our ways and become users, which allows for regeneration of resources. That is something that the Board of Selectmen can do as policymakers to try to instill that change. People don't like change, I get it, but it's something we have to consider. We've also had a lot of bad practices of putting our wells inside or adjacent to industrial parks. We've got to get away from that. The old days, it was for access. Made sense, but that's a very simplistic model. When we look for well sites, we have to isolate them, zone around them, and protect them. And consider when we put a conservation restriction on a piece of property, which is a preservation tool, not a conservation tool, that we allow for well site development without a legislative action on Beacon Hill. Thank you.
Thank you. To understand the aquifer system, you have to understand that in Plymouth, the contour of bedrock sits at about 122 feet deep. It's an undulating curve as left by the glaciers. There's a difference between aquifer water and artesian water. The greatest threat, in my opinion, to aquifer water is sprawl. Sprawl is a definition of sprawl would be a development pattern that is characterized by low density requirements, such as Clark Estates, where you have 3 or 4 acres of lawn, you have stripped the natural vegetation, the water table is contaminated with chemicals, that goes into the aquifer. As versus downtown development, White Cliffs development, Pine Hills development, where you have clustered densities and proper sewage disposal. Malcolm said that sewer is the greatest thing. I think pavement is equally as damaging and detrimental long-term to recharging of water and point pollution. Thank you.
I feel that residential development is a bit out of control, but I believe we must get every inch of land that we can that could adversely affect our aquifer. As of the last town meeting, an article was pulled for another well because of the price tag, which was $38 million. Something we're gonna have to address sooner than later. We need to stop talking about it and actually come up with a solid plan that's going to address all of these issues. Thanks.
Do you believe that expanding ecotourism infrastructure and opportunities could lead to potential new revenues for the town and local businesses? Please describe your views.
Absolutely. Ecotourism is, it's wonderful. I mean, we have the most beautiful trails, the Pine Hills as one of them. And also what some folks may not know is there's an additional 28 acres that actually abuts the Entergy property on the ocean side, which also ties into the nature trail, which is on Entergy property as well. So ecotourism is big in many rural communities. I think it's a lost revenue stream that we really haven't concentrated on, and I think it's something that we really need to grab onto. Thanks.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I can. Do you believe that expanding ecotourism infrastructure and opportunities could lead to potential new revenues for the town and local businesses? Please describe your views.
Absolutely, and you could start with the harbor dredging, bring in some cruise ships. That's one facet of ecotourism. Passive recreation is another one. Trails, they're open and equal access to beaches, another one of my platform planks. There are a number of things you can do. Piping plovers are one thing, open access and common sense. We have to redefine common sense, in my opinion. If we all think about the future and treat people the way we want to be treated ourselves, it'll be a better world, and we can apply that to ecotourism as well. This town depends on the tourist dollar big time. How are we going to pay for the 2020 event? Has anyone in this room thought about that? I have.
We're here, we spoke of public investment in open space, a wonderful thing. But we can realize some economic benefit from that through ecotourism. We have spectacular resources on many of our properties which are reasonably accessible. There are some endangered species areas you don't want to go to, and some patches within larger areas that you don't want access to, but there are several areas which would help the public enjoy the spectacular nature of our landscape as they do at the Cape Cod National Seashore. And oh, by the way, they'd probably be about 45 miles a shorter trip. We also have an untapped resource, okay? We have colleges in the southeastern part of the state who teach environmental sciences. We should be approaching them to see if we could establish internships for students that could get credit and do interpretive speaking on elements of our natural landscape. And their pay would be credit, not dollars. So we need to realize some economic gain from ecotourism on what we've invested in. And we have a great opportunity to do so. And I'm all for ecotourism and expanding it throughout the landscape of Plymouth beyond just whale watches in the harbor.
Ecotourism has got a bad name from the Finance Committee, so I've changed it to environmental tourism. We have a wonderful system here. Beaches and the harbor has been mentioned. My favorite is the landscape and the trails, and I agree with Mark that it would be really wonderful if we could develop internships for students, particularly at the college that I work at. Wildlands Trust is doing that. We're starting that. Every weekend we have a number of interpretive systems to go hiking on trails and various bird watching and the like. We have developed, and we're going to have a hike shortly of a trail which is 18 miles long, crosses two paved roads, all through the woods. There isn't any place else in southeastern Massachusetts where you can do that. Thank you.
Anything that can bring people to this community where they can have a positive experience and make a return trip is an asset, okay? Ecotourism, prior candidate said that, $12.6 million, hopefully from the feds and the state, dredge the harbor, get the small ships in here, 150 people are getting off and going out and enjoying our shops and restaurants. You just had a major harbor report, whereas we don't have any passive recreational opportunities within the harbor and out on Long Beach. It is very minimal. We don't do anything for these people. We've got to try to expand that. White Horse Beach, wonderful natural asset. Millions of gallons annually of untreated human waste injected into the beach. It's covered in cesspools. We've removed 3 cottages. How do you move a mountain? A pebble at a time. We've started, but in the last few years, we've removed 3 cottages from White Horse Beach. That's 3 fewer cesspools. Here's one for you. How about an Audubon sanctuary in Plymouth, Massachusetts? Do we have one? No, but we're going to get one. Where's Gloriana and Evan? There they are in the front row. I commend you on your efforts. Tidmarsh down there in Manomet, what a phenomenal restoration project. That's investments like that are going to continue to bring more people to this community and diversify our economy.
Thank you. I do a lot of work with Destination Plymouth, and one of the things that they do not do is encourage ecotourism, and it's very important. I try to do as much ecotourism as I can. I did one in Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and back into Colorado. It was spectacular. The only drawback to it was when we went up to the Rocky Mountains at 12,000 feet, I ran out of oxygen and couldn't go any higher. COPD. But it was wonderful. It was beautiful. We don't have mountains that high, but we do have some beautiful trails. We have beautiful beaches. We have beautiful ponds, kayaking, swimming, all those natural resources that we could have our tourists come and enjoy them and stay longer. One of the problems we find is our tourists come for one day and then they move on somewhere else. This morning I saw an article on the news about the Cape Cod National Seashore, and they commented, what would this look like if they had not taken this land? And it would probably be all homes, those sand dunes would be gone. We need to invest in ecotourism. It's a great product for the town, and I will speak to Paul Cripps about presenting this to our visitors. Thank you.
Please describe a recent land use or development project that you believe benefited the town. Please describe the benefits as you see them.
I think one of our most recent ones that's just spectacular is Hedges Pond. We purchased the pond through the CPC, and we got every piece of land that is around that pond. So that pond is in perfect water. It's just a great asset to the town. In the summer, we have summer camps, and the money that we generate from those summer camps pay for the upkeep of that beautiful pond. Residents are allowed to go. We can walk around the trails. We can't enter the campground while children are there, and I applaud them for doing that. There's too many strange people in the world today, but after the camp ends in the afternoon, all the residents of the town are welcome there, and I hope all of you have visited or will visit Hedges Pond Recreational Area. Thank you.
30 miles of ocean frontage, a pond for every day of the year, and I'm going to reinforce what he just said. The single best waterfront access, saltwater or freshwater, in this community is Hedges Pond. Community Preservation Act. I was on the Finance and Advisory Board in 2007. Mr. Cohen was in the room, brought the article forward. It was a $1.5 million acquisition. We were going to partner with the YMCA. They were in for half. The town wasn't going to get the camp. We were going to get the land around the pond. They fell through. We went to the closing. We took the whole thing. Back then, it was a dollar for dollar match. Your CPA funds were expended at $750,000. The rest of the state came in at $750,000. You look at the issues we have at Whitehorse Beach, Long Beach, Morton Park, etc. This Hedges Pond sets the bar. Security, there's one way in, there's one way out. The quality of the water is off the charts. It's a spring-fed pond. You own all the woods around the pond. Access, there's facilities, there's infrastructure. It doesn't get any better in this community as far as Hedges Pond. If you haven't been there, you need to get there. And with respect to the future, that's what you're trying to duplicate.
I'll move away from public acquisitions and say the best project was this one. We have here a dynamo in environmental education and protecting the environment. All of the programs that we run from here stretch out into all of the lands that the town owns and that Wildlands Trust owns, and they're continuing to develop, and these type of things are what continue to bring in people from the tourists from the outside to use all the other aspects we have in town.
I'm going to go a little bit differently. I applaud all the open space acquisitions and what has been developed for public access. However, the question was land use. And land use has to deal with growth and also has to deal with conservation and protection. I think that the two best projects in town are the Pine Hills and Makepeace, because the Osmond, the Pine Hills zoning overlay, and the Trevid, the Makepeace zoning overlay, allow for smart growth, wise growth, conservation, open space, and public access. And when we're talking about, I'm an environmental consultant. I do this work every day of my life. And there is a reality. People live on this planet and need resources and need facilities. And I spoke earlier of balance, and we have to balance those things. And I think that both Pine Hills and Makepeace, while they may not be as desirable to a pure open space person, is wise land use, combining development use, conservation, and preservation. Thank you.
I totally agree with the previous four speakers. I would say that infill development, adaptive reuse are two key words that haven't been used. Evapotranspiration, all these things have to do with open space, optimal land use, economic return. Hedges Pond is a very high bar. Our natural coast has to be preserved. The piping plover has to be protected, but everybody has to redefine common sense and come to a common thread of understanding. One thing that bothers me about Plymouth is its failure to communicate properly. How many people do you know that aren't even aware or haven't heard of Hedges Pond? How many people think that people that live in Pine Hills have their nose up in the air? How many people do you think live in Pine Hills that don't think that they should have to pay for the sewer downtown. This town, the only way this town communicates, to my way of thinking, is when they go before a precinct caucus, and then not too many people go. I attended all 15, and only 122 people went. I see the yellow cards all hang up. Great input by all the speakers on this issue. Thanks.
Actually, I do believe it's Hedges Pond, and as the president of the Plymouth Youth Foundation, we have committed to the town of Plymouth that Hedges Pond will be our next project for that building. So, as you folks probably know, that the building on Hedges Pond is not habitable. So when there are summer camps for kids, if it rains, they can't use it, and they have to cancel camp. So as the president of our foundation and our board of directors, we have committed to raising money and funds to bring that building back to its grandeur. So I'm very excited about the Hedges Pond project because all the successes that we had at the Manomet Youth Center, we plan on bringing to Hedges Pond as well. Thanks.
Well, that takes us to the end of the planned questions, and now we'll get to hear some of your questions. So we'll start with you, Ms. Cavacco. How do you plan to protect our environment and our quality of life so we are no longer threatened by living near a nuclear waste dump? You knew that was coming.
And I'm just the perfect person to answer it. Well, as I don't know if many folks know, but as some folks know, that I was an Entergy employee for 30 years. The dry cast storage is nothing that I as a resident signed up for, and I'm sure none of you did as well. I am hopeful that at some point we can get our state delegation to go back to the president and whatever they have to do, the Nuclear Mitigation Society or whatever it is, we need to address the reopening of Yucca Mountain. And we need to get that dry cast storage out of here. So I'm not in favor of the dry cast. I do know that the state of Vermont sued the federal government over dry cast, won over $90 million because of it, and I expect the town of Plymouth and I will champion to do the same thing. Thank you.
There's nothing the new Board of Selectmen are going to do about the safety feature at that plant. One thing you should know is that Chapter 61, those 1,500 acres are now under Chapter 61, and technically that expires in 2022. There is no guarantee that the town is going to have anything to do with that 1,500 acres. We can sit here and plan, but we don't have anything definitively at this point in time. As far as the safety of it, I knew about that when I moved to Plymouth. It doesn't bother me. I also think that Harry Reid, we'd have Yucca Mountain now if it weren't for Harry Reid, to be honest with you. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It has to do with crossing state lines. Those casks weigh about 300 tons apiece, and they're going to go in a flat train bed, and they have to be transported that way. They can't go through the Panama Canal. So until those are removed, and they can be there up to 60 years. I didn't know whether you knew that or not. Thank you.
I think a Board of Selectmen doesn't have a lot of leverage in something like this. However, I think that the Board of Selectmen has some leverage and continue to exert that leverage with our federal delegation. Like it or not, we may have a president who would be a little bit more lenient to move in this stuff than previous presidents and administrations. So I think we have to maximize our effort. However, understand that it's still a hugely difficult task, but we have to hold the feds accountable to promises and commitments that they made way back when this town voted to be a home to a nuclear power facility. And that's what we have to do. How effective we can be, I do not know. My guess is not very. However, that should not dissuade us from continuing to exert leverage as long as we possibly can, and I will do that.
I would say in the long term that since we are pretty much unable to move it, that sooner or later we should figure out how to reprocess it. We did know how to do that some years ago, but it was a kind of a disaster, so they shut that whole operation down. But if we can determine how to reprocess it effectively and safely, then maybe it will become easier to move it out and not necessarily bury it, but get the energy that's still in it and make use of it.
A few years ago, I ran into a U.S. congressman from Massachusetts whose last name was not Keating. And obviously he knew he was a Democrat. And I knew I had a limited amount of time with him, so I quickly said, nice to meet you, John Mahoney, Plymouth Board of Selectmen. Went into the power plant and the fuel. Shrugged his shoulders, he looked at me and said, John, I don't know what the solution is. All I can tell you is I don't want it to move. I just want it to stay where it is. And he had no answer. And so, what does it tell you about Harry Reid of the state of Nevada when basically the federal government was going to open up their checkbook and hand them billions of dollars to put this stuff under a mountain 150 miles from the nearest residential home? So, whether you like it or not, you're a de facto nuclear waste dump. Your compensation is zero. I can see the future of probably 10 to 15 years down the road when the decommissioning is done. You're probably going to be on the hook for all the security and the police and fire and all this and that. This has been the biggest boondoggle of any community in the history of New England. The federal government, the Congress and your U.S. Senate has built the NRC up to they are impervious to political power. They are untouchable, and that's the problem. This whole thing comes down to your federal delegation in a miracle down in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. When the state of Nevada chose to build, at the request of the federal government, chose to dig, mine Yucca Mountain, and I've been there, the opening to it is so wide that they put one train goes in and another train comes out simultaneously, pulling gravel out. They did this for jobs. Once they had mined it all out, they said, we changed our mind. We don't want you spent fuel rods. And they certainly do have that right. It's their state to say, no, we're not going to accept them. But just recently, I spoke to a couple of gentlemen that are working at the power plant right now, and I asked them about the dry casts. I said, how safe are they? And he said, they tried to blow them up without any nuclear materials inside them. They used C4. They weren't damaged. They sent rockets into them. They weren't damaged. They even drove a train at 60 miles an hour into them and did not damage them. We're going to have that dry cast storage for a long time, well past my lifetime and probably past most of us in this room. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I have a picture of John jumping into Hedges Pond on the river cutting day. I'll show it if you don't believe me.
Policing uses and abuses of the land in Plymouth is a particular challenge given the size of our town. What will you do if elected to enforce limits on sand and gravel removal, off-road vehicles, and illegal dumping?
Well, fortunately, we put together a great sand and gravel bylaw that was passed by town meeting with some modifications. Illegal gravel removal is very difficult. When someone's doing that, they usually put up a chain link fence and say no trespassing, so you can't get in to see it. And I spoke to you earlier about the dirt bikes that we saw up on the top of the Pine Hills. They're scary. They're all over this town. They're like ants. The environmental police, I'm told, are the only ones that can track these people down. But they know the trails better than the environmental police, so they just, if there's 4 of them, they just split up into 4 different directions, and we can never catch up with them. I don't know what the way, I believe that there was, I'm trying to remember what the group was, they're off Long Pond Road, that they put a barrier over one of the bridges, and they came in one night with an acetylene torch or something and just cut it off so that they could get across the bridge. They're unstoppable. Thank you.
Brief aside on Hedges Pond. So we purchased it in '07, then invested some more money to put the infrastructure up to date in '11, and yes, I did jump in the water. I was disappointed that nobody else went in the water with me, but that was my tribute to Bill Weld jumping into the Charles River back in the '90s.
I couldn't get my camera wet.
Okay, so the sand and gravel bylaw, we just got something passed, hopefully more equitable and fair throughout the community at town meeting. ORVs and, your ATVs and stuff like that and the dirt bikes. A few years ago, I'd have to think about the year, the board voted to create the Division of Marine and Environmental Affairs. We hired one of our own not only from an individual that grew up in the community, you're probably all familiar with, but he went to high school here and he's been working at Town Hall for a while, David Gould. We've given him a few bodies over the years. They call them NROs, Natural Resource Officers, and you can never have enough of them. But in a perfect world, they're out there hopefully enforcing what our laws are. And I think long-term, you've got to figure out, whether it's public or private, buying a piece of land that can be designated for some of these things, where in theory, these individuals can go there, and that will reduce the wear and tear on the public lands.
With regards to dirt bikes, they're all over the place. They're ruining the land, ruining the forest. There's locations in the forest that trails that are 8 feet deep because of them. And the only way to stop them is to get a troop of people, a troop of police out there on the weekends when most of the ORV riding is done, and put them strategically in the woods and stop them. I had suggested one year that a policeman stay at a location on Bourne Road where every weekend 25 or 30 of them went by and give tickets at that time, but that never transpired. So there has to be a concerted effort to do this if we're going to stop the ORVs. The sand and gravel bylaw we just finished. It took 2 years. It's an excellent bylaw. Unfortunately, you'll see that it won't stop Mr. Landers because he's locked in with regards to zoning for another 8 years on his project.
In regards to sand and gravel, Malcolm to my left and I sat on the committee that wrote that bylaw. It's not a purely impervious bylaw. There are holes in it, but it's a lot better than what we had. And it forces sand and gravel people to be a little bit more accountable for what they're doing, and especially with end uses. In terms of dirt bikes, public access is public access. And we might not like certain uses, but if you're going to have public access to land, everybody, the entire public, has access. I think what happens is, and we could get into a discussion on taxes, where you have to hire more people, more enforcement, taxes are going to go up. I think it's incumbent upon us, all of us, because if you're here in this room right now, I'm guessing you're a steward of the land or you're a steward of the water. It's incumbent on us to be more proactive in managing the uses of lands that are proximal to us. I live in an area with a lot of open space, and I do chase down folks. In terms of cleanup, I think we should expand the community cleanup. I know there's some faces in here, and I support that. Thank you.
So do I. The sand and gravel bylaw was overdue, but it's an excellent piece. It's not perfect, Mark, but it is a great beginning. And I congratulate all of you and those of you in this room that helped put that together. In terms of the dirt bike issue, also, everyone is entitled to multi-use of the lands, but there has to be a designated place for it. Well, it won't be injurious to the landscape. And there are such places, roller skate parks and so forth. There's passive recreation, there's active recreation. I would like to see Frank Mann on the headlines of the old Colonial Memorial post a violation which has caught some dirt bike guy with enforcement, an NRO, natural resources officer, pinches some kid or adult or whoever it may be. It makes the headlines. The word would get out straight, quickly. Heavy enforcement, make everyone adhere to the law, become educated, generally speaking, and take a smart pill.
Thank you. The sand and gravel bylaw is excellent. Issues with off-road vehicles. We need an area for these kids and these adults to be able to go someplace and do off-road vehicles. Where that is, I'm not sure, but I know one thing. I'd rather have these kids in the wood riding dirt bikes and off-road vehicles than smoking crack and shooting heroin. My own opinion. I know the environmental police are the only ones that have any arresting powers in these lands. The natural resource officers do not have police arresting powers. They just don't. So that's something that we have to look into. But instead of saying that we have to get rid of them or try, we need to find a place for them. Because dirt biking isn't horrible. I mean, it does do stuff to our forest and we don't want to see that. But if we give them a location, I'd rather see them do that instead of saying no, 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 and spend resources trying to stop them.
Keeping our rural residential zoned areas both rural and residential is critical to those of us who choose to live here. What will you do to assure that we keep these areas free from commercial encroachment?
Well, I mean, we have specific bylaws that deem what is residential, what is light industrial, and what is the way it is. One of the big debates was ground-mounted solar in residential area. I supported that bylaw to change it to 5 acres, because when you're talking about a 15-acre ground-mounted solar array, it's commercial to me. So one of the things is that we have to stick with what we have on our books. So rural residential is just that, residential. No commercial, no nothing. Stick with what we have. And if we need to do things better, then we need to do things better and make sure that we commit to what's there already and make it better.
In 2009, the Cedarville Master Plan was updated. 2014, Manomet. 2011, North Plymouth. 2004, Downtown and Waterfront. 2016, West Plymouth. They all have zoned densities of varying uses. Rural residential implies rural residential, but we cannot permit sprawl to continue. Sprawl is defined as a house that is located from another house at a distance which is not economically, it requires a lot of money from the town to maintain that, plowing, sewer services, etc. It takes pavement to get there. That pavement becomes a point of pollution, and it does not add to the recharge of water into the aquifer. I think sprawl in a rural residential area has to be looked at carefully, and if I were elected, I would advocate putting people in a place to do just that. Look at it carefully.
The U.S. Constitution gives people the right to extract reasonable economic gain from both financial or intrinsic economics. That would include property, intellectual property. However, we also have a Zoning Enabling Act, which is allowed by the state, which allows towns to craft zoning bylaws, of which Plymouth has. We have a massively cumbersome one. There is a draft to improve it somewhat, but we have a zoning bylaw. And for those of you in the room who don't understand what zoning is, because I'm a student of zoning, zoning is what you cannot do on a piece of land. It's not what you can do. And Plymouth has a very bad habit of using the zoning bylaw as a planning tool, which is a huge mistake. In terms of solar bylaw, the solar bylaw that was just passed is fine, but there was no need. Commercial uses are not allowed in residential zones, whether it's R25 or rural residential. The existing bylaw protects us from these kind of things, and I agree with Betty. Ground-mounted solar is a commercial use.
In terms of protecting the rural residential zone, we have 3-acre zoning. Planning Board has not ever approved anything with 3-acre lots for as long as I can remember. We cluster the zone and we cluster the homes in as little as a 1/2-acre lots and save the rest as open space, which is about all we can do in protecting that land. So Red Brook, for instance, Pine Hills protected large amounts of open space using those rules and regulations. Solar bylaw in the woods is absurd. I think the new bylaw we have in place, where you can put a minimum of 5 acres with a 150 to 200 foot buffer, eliminates a lot of people from doing it, because now you need 17 to 35 acres of property to build a solar farm, hopefully forcing them onto pavements and rooftops where they belong.
It was on the waterfront, I think late summer of 14, Deval Patrick came down for some sort of press conference on the harbor, and I had a few minutes with his chief of staff, or one of his top people. I think his name is Rick Sullivan. So I told him that the state can't incentivize people to cut trees down to put up solar farms. It doesn't make any sense. What happens is government they're not proactive, everything is reactionary. We just brought a couple of articles to town meeting a month or so ago, because it took us 40 to 50 years to connect the dots between the fact that the auto excise tax wasn't earmarked for roads. We were wondering why we had $135 million worth of debt. So I told Mr. Sullivan that, and I told him if government is doing anything to incentivize, it should be on abandoned cranberry bogs, brown sites, South Street transfer station, a capped landfill. So this one we were slightly behind the curve on. We went from 15 acres, we're down to 15. Hopefully this will eliminate some of these proposals that you see throughout the community that are just train wrecks.
Thank you. With the zoning we have in place, you cannot change it from rural residential to commercial. You simply can't do that. But yet I've heard people say that they would like to take some rural residential area that abuts an already existing commercial development or commercial park and rezone that so that they could expand the parks. Right now we only have 5% of our industrial land to develop on. That's not much. If we want to reduce our taxes, we need to bring more commercial, high-end commercial into this town. I'm not proposing changing the zoning on any land, but there are people out there that would like to do that. But as our zoning sits today, we cannot do that. I don't know whether we need to go to the state to make those changes or not, but I would not be in favor of that. Thank you.
All right, this is going to be the last question before you're allowed to do your 1-minute summary. How will you ensure the quality of Plymouth's water, given that so many ponds are currently polluted?
The main reason our ponds become polluted is because the neighbors around are always putting fertilizer and herbicides and all of this on their lawns, would eventually get into the water and therefore pollute the water. We've had invasive plants grow into our ponds, and I know that one article went before town meeting for Morton Park to kill one of the plants that was growing in and was really taking over that pond. I don't know how you tell someone not to fertilize, but we really should, as people, as owners of the water that sits below the ground, think about what you're doing when you're fertilizing your lawn and you're putting bug killer on your lawn. Think for yourselves. That's the best way that we can protect the water from being poisoned. Thank you.
You have to give the department heads the tools they need to do the job. We don't do that as government. Single greatest worst handling of a revenue stream in the history of New England was plowing the entire nuclear power plant's revenue stream into the general fund. 46 years later, you've taken in over $1 billion. You have nothing to show for it. Most important thing you can do is learn from the mistakes of the past and change your behavior. I sponsored a home rule petition a year or two ago at town meeting to take finite revenue streams, okay, which was pilot programs that were going to end in 20 years from your renewable energy projects, wind and solar, and dedicate annually 50% of that revenue to David Gould so he can go out and get into the neighborhoods and You have numerous ponds, I mean, obviously literally dozens, if not hundreds of ponds that need some sort of mitigation. And instead of him coming back to town meeting every year and asking for money, you're giving him a little bit of seed money where he could be proactive and start tackling these issues before they get more expensive.
Saving the ponds does affect the aquifer, but the aquifer is substantially larger and less, there's less impact to it. Saving the ponds is a difficult job, especially when the homes around the ponds have been there for 20 years or so. Because the limiting reagent in ponds is phosphate. Phosphate is bound up in the soil for a while as the water from the septic systems on the lawn fertilization then percolates towards the ponds. But after about 20 years or so, a standard house, a standard septic system 100 feet away, that phosphate would have reached the pond, and the pond will then become eutrophic. And there's no real way to stop that unless you move the septic systems every year. You can mitigate it by harvesting the ponds, which we've done at Billington Sea for many, many years, and remove the weeds, but you still have the phosphate load. Nothing much you can do once they're at that state.
The reality is that every isolated body of water will eutrophy. That's the natural cause, and that's the natural cycle, with humans or without. What we're talking about when we say water pollution, and I'm assuming you're talking about eutrophication, but there are other water pollution issues, is accelerated eutrophication, okay, which is human-induced or anthropogenic eutrophication. And there really is very little you can do to stop or enforce this as a member of the Board of Selectmen. However, what the Board of Selectmen need to be doing is educating the public. We are the stewards of the land. I'm not putting the blame on us because we're doing normal activities that have been acceptable for years. What we do know now is some of these normal activities are not as benign as we thought. As a policy maker, a selectman or a board of selectmen must start educating the public because each of us are stewards of our own parcel of land. 10 acres, 2 acres, 100 acre, 25,000 square feet. It does not matter.
It's nice being in the middle because I get to agree with everyone. I agree with you, Mark. I'm concerned though about the half-life of chemicals, pesticides, climate change, warmer weather, acid rain, nitrification, algae blooms, restrict gas-operated motors on ponds where it is allowed. I disagree, Malcolm, a little bit. I think saving ponds does affect the aquifer. I bet on it. One thing I would do, I like the education aspect, although it's a cop-out, but I agree with the education aspect. You have to start somewhere. I think this CPA, getting back to the CPA, I'm totally in favor of increasing it from 1.5% to 3%. And let's just take a special fund. Let's not pour it to John Mahoney's point of view into the general fund. Let's have a specific fund to help David Gould address contamination of ponds. Why can't we do that? We can do that. Thank you.
You know, we have an amazing community, and when we work together, we can accomplish anything. And I think it will simply get down to a cry for help. I think if we communicate to our residents about what their pesticides are doing to our ponds, and if they could see through maybe trying something else, and educating our residents of what it would take to help offset that, I think they would be more than happy to help within our community. Now, I do agree, Mr. Gould needs some money to help save our ponds, but honestly, if we communicate to our residents and actually put out almost a cry for help, I am certain that those people would band together like they do with every other issue that comes before us, and we could rectify the situation. We may not be able to fix it completely, but I bet we could help. Thanks.
All right, that brings us to the close of the question period and the answer period. So now if you'd each take a minute and have some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. As a resident of Plymouth for over 50 years, I know that we live in an amazing community. Our children will now be fifth-generation Plymouthians. Our beloved Plymouth is at an important crossroad as we head into the future. You know it, and I know it. Will the Selectmen finally focus on commercial light industrial development or residential development rather than just talking about it? I will. Will the Selectmen finally deal with increasing taxes by actually setting the budgets themselves and require town management to live within it? I will. We need strong leadership from the Selectmen. If you are happy with the current state of our government, do not vote for me. I plan on action and change. The successful future of Plymouth completely depends on you, the voters. Please vote on May 20th. I respectfully ask for your vote because your voice matters. Thank you.
Plymouth's daily water demand of 4.33 million gallons includes 519,000 gallons a day for commercial use, and this creates a severe burden on the town's water supply. Many of the potential developable properties are environmentally sensitive lands which we must protect to maintain water quality, preserve natural habitats, and avoid forest fragmentation. The rural residential district in particular has a significant amount of priority protection land which is vulnerable to development. We all know this. Together we have to balance and maintain fiscal stability, regulate and lessen sprawl, protect wildlife habitat, and protect the beaches, harbor, ponds, and rivers. If elected, I pledge to you that your interests will be more than adequately represented, and I ask for your consideration next Saturday, May 20th. Thank you.
I see many familiar faces in this room, and I think most of you know my 30 years of professional experience as an environmental professional. I think many of you know my environmental contributions to this community. Many of you know my work in this community, as I've presented in front of many of you before. And I think you know my ethic from my 30 years of public service to this town. I also teach land use at Bridgewater State University, formerly at Mass Maritime, and I teach a aquaculture certification program at Quincy College in Plymouth. I live environmental protection every day of my life. But I live it as an environmental professional, a practical approach. I've written many CRs, and I know what their limitations are and what they're not. I'd like to clarify 2 points. First of all, as a Board of Selectmen, I don't think that education is a cop-out. Okay, I just think that that's very important. The other one I want to make is ground-mounted solar. I meant large-scale ground-mounted solar. Residential was not to be included.
As a member of the planning board, I will continue on the path that I've been on for years, and that is to make sure any development we have is clustered with as much open space as possible, and all the latest techniques are used in septic system disposal and water treatment.
I want to thank the Wildlands Trust for hosting this forum, and once again, this is a wonderful investment in John Mahoney perfect world. Hopefully I'll be here a couple of months from now with one of the 4 other candidates, or, as a member of the newly configured Plymouth Board of Selectmen. Not a politician. I strive to be a good elected official. 5 to 6 years ago, I supported an initiative for the Selectmen not to have full-time health care. It was completely inappropriate. I also supported an initiative recently to make sure that this town of Plymouth doesn't support the county commissioners giving themselves a $13,000 raise on a $10 million budget. That behavior is political hack to me, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or Independent. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear in order to get your vote. I've got a 9-year track record of success. I've brought multiple proposals to town meeting floor, common sense proposals. When you explain to town meeting why these things make sense for the community, they give it a thumbs up. When you can't do that, they don't support it. I'm asking for 1 of your 2 votes a week from today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Wildlands Trust for inviting us to this beautiful barn that doesn't look like a barn. This is just great. I've been a resident of Plymouth for 38 years. Of those 38 years, I've been in public service for 27 years. And I've always looked at what's best for the town, not what I think, but what's best for the town. And I promise you, as your next selectman, that I will use common sense when it comes to every decision I make and work for the town, for all of the town. Because we are one big town. We are village after village after village, but we're one town. We're all Plymouthians, and I will work for everybody. So please vote for Paul McAlduff on May 20th. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. You candidates, you made my job much easier. I was prepared for the worst. I expected the best, and you gave me better than I could have hoped for, so thank you very much. Your passion for open space is palpable, and I think the audience probably got what they needed from you today to help them along the road to making their decision. To the audience, you were wonderful. Thank you very much. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Rachel and Scott for timing over there, and for Karen for putting this all together.
For Charlotte Russell, whose idea this was.
And for Charlotte Russell, because it was her idea.